And it's where I actually came back from heaven from my second near-death experience, and there was a spirit that came with me. And he was as solid as you are. And he stayed with me for 3 years. I mean, I have so many spiritual stories that I could tell you that would just knock your socks off. But it was like these things were all happened as a result of that near-death experience.
So hi Soul Family and welcome to my channel. I'm your host Haji and this is amazing indie stories, and or it might be a whole new series because Sharon is amazing. Amazing spirit stories or something like that. So this is a different this is going to be a different interview. Because Sharon, my guest today is Sharon Milliman. Am I saying it right? Milliman?
Milliman. Mm-hmm.
Milliman, and she has had several NDEs, several spiritual experiences. I mean, the list goes on. Have you had any extraterrestrial? Like, oh, anything you can think it, she's had it. So, and so, Sharon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sharon and I, during our pre-interview chat, it ended up being like 3 hours, like over 3 hours. I was supposed to be at work. I was supposed to be doing things. Like she is just, once you start talking to Sharon, you don't want to stop because she just has a million stories and experiences. And she's an amazingly beautiful human being. And you'll know that if you've seen her other interviews. So I'm going to let Sharon jump into what she thinks is, she wants to share here. So whether it's part of an NDE and then going into the spiritual experiences, and then our Q&A will probably be longer than the first video. So let's, Sharon, just jump in and tell us about your amazing NDE and spiritual stories.
Okay. Well, I've had 4 near-death experiences, and the biggest and longest one, the deepest one, and the most impactful one was my second near-death experience. And what happened with that was I had 4 lightning strikes. 2 of them was ball lightning, and 2 was lightning, the lightning bolts. And that happened over the course of a couple of years. So when the 4th lightning strike hit me, I died in my backyard. And that's when I had my second near-death experience. And so the lightning hit me while I was talking on a cordless phone, and I died, and I went to heaven. My spirit left my body, and I went to heaven, or what I call heaven. And I saw my 2 brothers who had died when they were babies, but they were fully grown men, and they looked exactly like my dad when my dad was a young man. And so we had a wonderful family reunion. And they were the ones that told me I had died. And where I went was so beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. The love, the acceptance, the peace. There was no pain, no suffering. It was absolutely magnificent. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt totally loved and totally accepted and totally cherished for me. Not for what I looked like. I didn't have to be perfect. It didn't matter. I was loved. I met Jesus, and I also sat on a log. Jesus took me over to a wooded glen, and I sat down and I had a long conversation with God. So this was a very beautiful and much needed. It seemed like God was trying, with the lightning strikes, he was trying to get my attention, and I wasn't listening. So he yanked up the volume with each strike, until I was standing in front of him and he was able to give me the message. And his message to me was, don't listen to the world, listen to me. people were telling you you are not worth anything. You know, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're dumb, you're whatever, and you're listening to that. Don't listen to that stuff. That's not the way. You know, it doesn't matter what they tell you. What matters is what I tell you. And he told me I don't make junk. I don't make mistakes. Um, he told me that he loved me and that I was worth something and I was not what all of those people in the world was telling me that I was. And, you know, it was just a very long conversation. And then I came back to my body. And it's a very long, detailed, very detailed near-death experience, but I've told it so many times. But something happened after. There was a lot of things that happened after that near-death experience. And I've only shared it publicly once. And I was very nervous about it because I'd never spoke it before. I've written about it, but I've never spoke it. So I feel like it's something, there's been a few other people that have written about it. They've had the same experience. And so I feel like it's time to come out with it. From what I understand from other researchers that have talked about it, it's a rare phenomena that happens sometimes when you have a very deep near-death experience, where when you come back, you bring a spirit back with you. And that's what happened to me. And this spirit that came back with me had been a living person at one time. His name was Gabriel Gray Eagle. He was Lakota. He was actually Sitting Bull's brother-in-law. He was born Oglala, and he married Sitting Bull's into Sitting Bull's family. And so he became, through marriage, he became Hunk Papa. And so he, you know, he was in Sitting Bull's family through marriage. And when he came to me, he was just as solid as you are solid, you know. And I remember seeing, what's interesting is that I had seen him twice as a young child. Of course, I was seeing spirits all my life, and people thought I was nuts, but I was, and I didn't know that they were spirits when I was little. I thought they were just people because they looked like normal people. And I saw him twice. When I was a little girl, we had a house, and behind our house was a golden wheat field. And I saw him one day, and he was on his horse, and he was just walking through the wheat field. And I saw him, and he looked over at me. I was playing, and that was it. And I thought, well, he's just a guy riding his horse. So what? You know, no big deal. I didn't care. I just went on playing. And then I saw him again, and he was not on the horse. He was walking the horse, and he brought the horse over to me, and the horse kind of leaned its head down, and I was playing with the top of the horse's head, and I was playing with his ears, and his ears felt so soft, and I was laughing. And I looked at the man, and he was smiling, and he just had this very tender smile and very gentleness about him. I wasn't afraid of him at all. He just, you know, because he was so kind, you know. I love that horse, you know. It was like I was playing with a teddy bear, you know. That's what it felt like. And I was just laughing, and then, you know, he turned and walked away. It wasn't like he went poof and he was gone. It wasn't like that. It wasn't a scary thing. It wasn't frightening to me. But I never thought about him again after that because we moved and I grew up and was going to high school and dating boys and all that kind of thing. So I just kind of never thought about it anymore. But then after this experience, I remember it was only a few days after the experience. And after I'd gotten out of the hospital, I was back to doing my regular, you know, daily household stuff. And I went into my spare bedroom to put some laundry away. And there's this beautiful native man standing next to the mantle in the bedroom. And he was holding a flower from the flower arrangement. So at this point, I knew that he was a spirit, but he looked like a human being. I mean, he just so solid. And he was wearing the same clothes that he was wearing when I was a child. And I thought, wow. And I thought, he hadn't aged a bit since I saw him. It did take me a minute to re-recognize him. I had to kind of look at him a minute. I thought, oh, I know you, but where? And then it was like, oh, okay. But I wasn't afraid of him. There was nothing about him that made me afraid. And it was like, okay, so why are you here and who are you? And, what do you want? What is it that you have to say? But that's when the lessons began. He came to, and he started teaching me. And of course, I wasn't raised in any Native tradition. So nothing that he was teaching me, I mean, I hadn't heard of anything. All of this was new stuff to me. I had no Native knowledge whatsoever. And so he he was very respectful and honored what I was raised in. And but he wanted to teach me his way, what his people, what they believed. And um he was with me for 3 years, and it was every day for 3 years. And it was constant teaching. And he also became not only just a teacher, but a mentor. He became a companion. He became, um, when my life was falling apart after my near death experience. And that is very common in a near death experience where, you know, your life, your old life falls apart and it's time to start a new life. My life was falling apart and I was very, very depressed. So he was there and he was confident. He listened to me. And what was also interesting is that 2 of my grandchildren saw him. So this wasn't like I made him up in my head that I wanted a knight in shining armor to come and rescue me. It wasn't that. This was a real human being. And my grandchildren saw him. And I had an artist friend who could see spirits. And I said, go to him and let him see you and let him draw you. If that's your will and his will, I don't want to overstep whatever boundaries there are. I don't know what boundaries there are. And he did. And I have the picture and I can actually show it to you if you want that. But so he taught me a lot of things, of which I can tell you what they were. But he his he had a funny personality. He was very compassionate and very strong and gentle at the same time. Um, he he taught me things like, why, practical things. And then he started teaching me spiritual things. He taught me why when he first came to me, he taught the way he taught me, because I couldn't understand what he was saying to me because he wasn't speaking in English. He was speaking in his native tongue, and I was like, I can't. If you don't speak in English, I can't understand a word you're saying. And then he started, as soon as I said that, he started speaking in English. But before he was speaking in English, because there was going to be a real communication problem, because I couldn't understand him at all. I mean, he kept talking, but I couldn't make heads or tail. I couldn't understand. So he was showing me. I mean, it was like watching a YouTube video, but I had no computer. I had no phone. I mean, this was clear back in 2005. I had no cell phone. I didn't have a computer except downstairs, and I was upstairs in the bedroom. There was no computers like we have now. So it was like just watching moving pictures. And he started teaching me about what the Native American people believe in about names, and how a name would tell you a story about who the person was, about their spirituality, about their accomplishments in life, about who they were, what they believed in, and that kind of thing. That's what their names mean. And that oftentimes their names will change throughout their life based on their accomplishments and, that kind of thing. And that there are also times that families will carry that person's name. Like, his name was Gray Eagle. And so now his generations carry his name as their last name. That's an honor to be whatever Gray Eagle. So they belong to his family. It's the Gray Eagle family. And when they were put on the reservations, they were given first names, whatever first name, people, the whoever it was. Back in that day, there was a man named James McLaughlin who was like I don't know, the head of putting people on the reservations or whatever. And it wasn't what, I mean, he wrote a book about it, James McLaughlin did. And he talked about, what happened and, from his point of view. But it wasn't, they would hand out names, and it would be, like English names, and then use the person's real name as their last name. So anyway, his name was Gabriel Gray Eagle, and that's how he signed the census. And he was the head of his particular band of people. And so anyway, that was my first lesson, was what him teaching me. And the way he did that was he showed me these elk. Okay, there was elk on the prairie, and he showed them to me, and they were just grazing. And then he appeared in the pictures with the elk, but he was just a young teenager at the time. He was standing beside me as a grown man, but he showed me himself as a young person. And the elk lift their head, and they got scent of him. They knew that he was there, and they start to run away while he's running beside them, keeping up with them. And then the picture goes away. And then he looks at me and he starts talking again, and I can't understand him. And that's at the point that I said, you need to talk so I can understand you. And so he starts to speak in English. And he said, so what did you see in the picture? And I said, I saw elk. And he said, and what were they doing? I said, they were running. And he said, so what was my name? And I said, running out. I mean, it just seemed like logic to me. And he said, well, good, you learned quickly. And then poof, he was gone. And I was like, what's that got, where'd you go? And I waited like 3 days and he didn't come back. And I thought, okay, that didn't, what was that? What do you, and I waited and I waited and I waited. And then he came back like 3 days later. And this was my second lesson. And then he explained to me, I was like, where, and the second time that he came, he's standing in the doorway of the bedroom. And I didn't say anything to him. I saw him standing there and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if he was supposed to speak first or I was supposed to speak first, because I don't know anything about, proper etiquette. What are you supposed to do? And I wasn't trying to break any, unspoken rules or anything. I didn't know. And so I said, I waited and I waited, and he had this grin on his face. And I was like, okay, since you're not going to say anything and just stand there and smile, I'm going to go ahead and ask you, where were you? Where did you go? You've been gone for 3 days. Where did you go? And the last time you were here, you showed me some pictures about running elks, and then you were gone. And I don't know what does all that mean? Where did you go? And who are you? What am I supposed to call you? And he said, I was just trying to teach you about, time in your world is different than time in the spirit world. 3 days for you is 3 days, but in the spirit world, 3 days is nothing but a blink of an eye. And he said, I was trying to teach you about names. And he said, when I was a child, I had one name, but because I had counted coup before he said he was 12 winters old. He was not yet a man, and he had counted coup. And because of that, he had been given a new name. And so he was teaching me the importance of the name, a person's name in the Native tradition. And I was like, okay. And so that was like the first lesson. And as I told you before, names change because of what you do. And I knew that counting coup was one of the most important things that a warrior could do, it was huge. And so then, and he was teaching me also about time in the spirit world. Well, I'd been to the other side, so I knew what he was telling me was true. There is no time on the other side. You could be there for 1 minute. It seems like you're there forever. And so I knew that was true. And then I told him, I said, don't do that 3-day thing anymore. I said, you want to come back, you're welcome to come back every day. I want to learn more. I like having you here, and I want to learn more. And so he started coming every day, and every day there was a lesson. I remember one day he was trying to teach me about the shades of gray and how humans look at the world as black and white, but there are many truths within the shades of gray. And there was an eagle that was flying over my house, and he used that eagle to teach me about the shades of gray. He said the eagle has a white head and a white tail, but the brown feathers, and there's many shades of gray in that, mixed in with the brown in the body of the eagle. He said, now if you take, and he used nature a lot to prove his point. And so he was using this eagle. And he said, you know, there are many, many truths in the shades of gray, and you have to look. It's not, the world isn't just black and white. You have to look deeper to find the truth. And he was saying that there are dualities within everything and within everyone, and you have to embrace those dualities. You have to look at those things and to balance, to stay within balance. um and oh my goodness, he said so much. um he used to tell me stories and sing me songs about what had happened to his people. And some of them were so beautiful, um, full of strength and courage. And some of them were so sad because they were filled with um, just absolute horror and injustice. And they would make me cry. And oftentimes he'd reach over and wipe my tears off my face. And I knew that he was gentle and that he would never hurt me. He was compassionate. And I looked at what he was trying to teach me. He was teaching me his history, the history of his people and what had happened. And I looked at it as needless suffering because there was no sense in some of that, no reason for any of that. Gosh, I remember one night my granddaughter, now this is really interesting. My granddaughter came running down the stairs. I was in the kitchen cooking dinner, and um, my granddaughter came running down the stairs, and she said, Grandma, your Indian angel's up. I heard 3 knocks on the wall, and your Indian angel is upstairs and wants to talk to you." And I asked her, I said, "What did you say?" She said, "Your Indian angel. He's upstairs and wants to talk to you." I said, "Did you see him?" And she said, "Yes, I did." I said, "What did he look like?" And she described him perfectly. He had a scar on his arm, his right arm. And she even told me about that. I was like, wow. And then I had my youngest grandson, and actually he just turned 19, and he still talks about seeing gray eagle out in the backyard. And he said he was outside playing in the backyard by himself, and all of a sudden there's this, he called him an Indian. He said, "There's a big Indian out in the backyard." And he said, I stood on one side of the sidewalk and stared at him, and he stood on the other side of the sidewalk and stared at me, and we just stared at each other. And we didn't move. And I figured Gray Eagle didn't move because he didn't want to scare my grandson, because he was just a little thing. And he was like, I'm sure that he just stood there so that he didn't frighten my grandson. But Connor ran inside and he told me about it. And he still talks about it. But he described him also to the T. And the man I was married to at the time was very jealous of Gray Eagle. And he said, you know, how can I compete with a ghost? And this man was very abusive to me, very extremely abusive. And I had told him, I said, well, Gray Eagle is more of a man, even as a ghost, than you could ever be. So there's no point in trying to compete. Well, that was not the right thing to say. And so I mean, he blew up at me all the time. And I had asked Gray Eagle to please show yourself to him because he thinks I'm crazy. And Gray Eagle said, well, he could see me if he really wanted to, but he doesn't want to. He wouldn't believe even if he could see me. And he said, I'm afraid that if he does see me, he will hurt you and then I'd have to kill him. And I looked at him and I was like, what? And he started laughing. So, I mean, he had this really comical personality. He wasn't all serious. You know what I mean? He was funny. And I mean, when he said that to me, and my eyes just, my jaw hit the ground, you know, and then he just burst out laughing. I just lost it. And so we're laughing together. And there were moments that were very tender. Um, it was, there were moments when he was like a teacher. There were moments when he was like my best friend. Um, I used to get locked in to my backyard. I wasn't allowed to leave my home. Um, the man I was married to took the keys. He would lock the gate, lock the back, the garage. And the only way in and out of the house was through the front door, and he had neighbors watching the door. So if I left the house, I was in trouble. So what was interesting is Gray Eagle could manipulate the lock and get the gate open. And he'd hold his hand out and he'd say, come walk with me. And he would hold my hand and we'd go take a walk down the alley. And we'd be walking, you know, and he'd be pointing things out. He'd be showing me moss on the side of the tree. And he'd say, that's the north side. You know, you're facing, when you see moss, that's the north, you know. Why leaves flip over when it's going to rain? He would teach me about, he told me to watch the waterfowl. If I ever find myself lost, look for waterfowl and you know you'll find water. Things like that. He was teaching me things that I never would have thought of. You know, you live in the city, you're a city girl, you look for running water and toilets and bathrooms and that kind of thing. You don't look for what's obviously nature and what's out there. So he was trying to teach me what nature would tell me. And he was showing me where beauty could be found. And where I could find beauty that I had never seen before. And so he was teaching me things that just were just amazing. And when he started teaching me spiritual stuff, it was native spiritual stuff. You know, he told me that, you know, the Indian people didn't need a building in which to pray because the Great Spirit was everywhere. And everything was alive because the Great Spirit was in, you know, in the trees, in the water, in the mountains, in the sky, in the birds, you know, and that's why everything was alive with the spirit of the Great Spirit. And it was, you know, and when he talked, he sparkled, you know, he was just beautiful when he would talk about these things. And then he started talking about the spiritual paths that people walk on. And he said, it doesn't matter. He said, there are so many people on the planet now. He said, it doesn't matter what path a person takes as long as that path leads them to the Great Spirit. He said, if they live that path, then that's a good path. He said, it's a sacred path. It's a holy path. But if it leads them away from the Great Spirit, then it's not a good path. And, you know, there are lots of terms that are used nowadays that are, you know, call it religion, tradition, path, whatever the term is, it doesn't matter. Because there is no one right path, because there's so many people, you know, and that we're not supposed to judge. We're not supposed to bother another human being about what path they're taking. That's not our business, you know, but we're supposed to walk the holy way, the sacred way, whatever way that is. And that might be different for you. It might be different for me. It might be different for someone else. But whatever it is, make it the holy way, make it the sacred way, and let it lead you to the Great Spirit, or whatever name you give the one who created all. And he talked a lot about the past, and that there's going to come a time when we are all going to have to come together. And he said that you have to give this message. You have to let people know that it's time for the past to be let go, and the hurt that has been inflicted on others, because it's not just one particular race of people that have been suffering at the hands of selfishness. There are many people that have suffered at the hands of selfishness. And he said, and it's time now to let that hurt go. And that's important, because what we need to do is we all need to come together. We are all one family. We are all one race, the human race. We're not this division that's going on in the world. We're not divided. That's an illusion. We are all. We come from one place, and we're all going to go back to one place. And it doesn't matter, we're all brothers and sisters of the same Great Spirit. And we're going to need each other. And you have a piece of the puzzle, and I have a piece of the puzzle, and he has a piece of the puzzle. And we're all going to need to come and put the piece of the puzzle down on the table in order to get the bigger picture of what's going on. And he was saying that there's not any one race that has all the answers. Not any one tradition has all the answers. So we have to come together, and we have to celebrate with each other the things that we have in common. And we have to learn from each other those things that we have that are different. And we have to work together in order to survive. And we have to acknowledge the wrongdoings, ask for forgiveness, give forgiveness, accept each other exactly where we are, who we are, accept and tolerance, respect, honor. All of those things are important. And every one of us needs to give that to the other. And there should be, no, we shouldn't be judging each other about what the other believes or not believes. That's not our business, because I could go on. He taught so much. Well, then, when it was time for him to leave, there was a whole lot that went on that I could go into more and more, and we'd be here all day. But to make it a little bit quicker, I'll just skip. There's something that happened that I call the 5 sacred days, which there were other, that was super spiritual, but I'll leave that for another time. But he came to me when it was time for him to leave, and he warned me ahead of time that he was going to have to go. And I was like, no, no. And so he taught me how to see with my spiritual eyes. He said, when you look with your spiritual eyes, and don't just trust your physical eyes, look with your spiritual eyes, because you'll see further and more detail. And that not everything is what it appears to be. And not everyone is who they claim to be. So you have to be careful about that. Because I'm one of those people that I trust everybody. You tell me the sky is blue and the grass is red, I believe you. I mean, I don't, who am I to question? I don't care. He did talk to me one day about he talked to me about a medicine wheel and how his the ancient way of healing. Um, he called it bear medicine, and then he said, "No, you can't look it up. It's not what you can look up in a book or something." He said, "This has been passed down through generations by word of mouth, from medicine man to medicine man." And he said the medicine man would go in and put his hands on the person that was sick and say certain prayers. And he didn't tell me what the prayers were. I have no idea. And he said he would put their hands on them, say the prayers, pull the illness out of the person and into himself. And then he would go out into the medicine wheel. Then it was a wheel made of stone. And he would stand in the wheel, and he would say more prayers, and he would stomp his feet and clap his hands and jump up and down, whatever it was he needed to do to get the illness out of himself and back into the earth, where the earth could transform it into something else. And if that didn't work, then he would drink some sort of medication that he made or whatever to make himself throw up, and he'd go get in the river and wash himself off and throw up and get the illness out. But he had to get it out of himself. Um, and then he went on to tell me about the four directions and the colors that are associated with the four directions. And then he said there were two extra colors, one representing the sky and one representing the earth. And he proceeded to just, I mean, he went on and was explaining all this to me. And I was fascinated, just fascinated. I could sit and listen to this man talk for hours. But this was all stuff that I had never heard. I didn't understand. I mean, I never learned any of this kind of stuff. And then he did come to me one day, and he did tell me that he had to leave. And when it was time for him to leave, he put a brown blanket. He brought this big brown blanket, and he wrapped the blanket around both of us. And all he did was hug me. He hugged me, and I was crying. I wrapped my arms around his waist. I mean, this guy was a big, tall guy, right? And I'm just short, you know. And I just wrapped my arms around him and I just squeezed, you know. I was like, "No, you're not leaving. You're not. Nope, nope. I'm going to hold you here." And then he gave me this little pouch of herbs, and he said, "You keep them with you and they'll protect you." And then he unwrapped the bag, or the brown blanket, and he backed up. And when he backed up, he disappeared. And I just mourned. I cried. I cried so hard. It was like a real person dying, you know? It was so horrible. And it was like, um, I thought, I cried for about 2 years after that. Every day I would go out and I would call his name on the wind. "Come back to me. Come back. There's more." But finally I realized, you know, he told me that my wings healed. He named me a special name and that I cherish. And he also talked to me about, showed me actually, about a subject that I had never learned about, knew nothing about this, wasn't raised in not believing in this or knew anything about it, much less believing in it. And he came to me, and when he first started, he said that the Great Spirit wanted him to tell me about this because it would come back to me later in my life. And I was like, okay. And he was a nervous wreck, and I had never seen him nervous. He was always well put together and, you know, calm. And I was the one that was always freaking out. He was the one that was always calm, and but he was sweating and nervous, and he pulled the chair out and he sat down and he started talking and he'd start, well, no, that's not going to work. And then he'd, well, no, that's not going to work. And I was like, what is it? Just say it. What is this that you want to say that's so hard? So he couldn't find the words to tell me about a subject I had never heard of. So he started showing me those pictures again. And what I saw was several different pictures of different time periods. They were all native lives, different tribes or different nations or whatever the term is. And they wore different clothes. Their houses were different parts of the country, but it was the same two people. And then you could see that I saw the essence of these people. It was the same two people in each one of these scenarios. And one of them, it just made me cry. Well, they all did. I mean, because they all started out beautiful and loving and then ended tragically, every one of them did. But one of them really just literally, I just broke down and cried because in one of them, there was the woman was over, there was a teepee and or a lodge, and inside the lodge, I saw a man and he was holding this tiny baby and he was sobbing. And the woman was crying too, but she had two other small children. And so she was over with the smaller children. And they were getting ready to prepare the body of the baby. The baby had died. And it appeared that the baby had died of smallpox or something, and they had to prepare the body a special way. But he was holding that baby, and he wouldn't let anybody touch the baby. It was like he was going to do that, and apparently that was not. It was the women, the older women, and that were to prepare the body, not him. But he wouldn't. I mean, he was so beside himself over the death of his baby that he wouldn't let anyone touch her. It was a baby girl. And I saw that and I felt the emotion. It wasn't just looking at the pictures. It was feeling the emotions as well as watching it. And it became very real. And I looked at him and I'm like, what is this? And it was like, that was my first introduction to the possibility of past life. Because these people, they were the same two people who had apparently loved each other so deeply that they were always brought back to each other over and over and over. And I recognized the two smaller children that the woman was with, and one of them, I could see it. The little boy was my grandson, and the little girl was my granddaughter that I have now. And so it was like I was in shock. I was like, oh my God, I know these two. And so it was like he was trying to teach me about that concept. But I said a prayer after I watched that. And I said, God, if this is real, if that's what he's telling me and this is real, and I ever get the inclination of ever wanting to come back here and do this again, I want you to tie me to a rock and sit on top of me, because I don't want to come back here and do this again. It was so painful watching those things and thinking, you love someone so much and you find that person over and over and over, and you lose that person over and over and over. So I don't know if that was real or if that was just his way of teaching me what that concept was. And um, and then after that is when he came with the blanket and hugged me. And so that's just that's it in a nutshell. There's a whole lot more.
Yeah.